Chapter 1. The Emerald Vale. In the heart of the Emerald Vale, where sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of colossal trees, I existed as an ethereal, a being born of starlight and whispers. The air shimmered with an ancient magic, vibrant and alive, and the very ground pulsed with a rhythm only my kind could hear. The vale was a sanctuary, untouched by mortal hands, its beauty a tapestry of iridescent moss, crystalline streams, and flora that glowed faintly in the twilight. My kind moved unseen here, slipping between the realms as guardians of the world's hidden balance. For countless cycles, my existence had been simple and serene, untouched by the mortal world. We ethereals did not yearn, did not change. We were the watchers, the keepers of secrets. But fate, ever unpredictable, chose to weave a new thread into my life. It began on a day like any other, when the golden light of dawn kissed the treetops and the hum of the forest was a lullaby. That was when he appeared, the human who would alter the very fabric of my being. I first saw him through a veil of mist as he stepped into the forest. His arrival disrupted the delicate harmony of the glade. Boots crunched over glowing moss, sending faint pulses of light radiating outwards. Humans did not come here. The vale's magic turned their hearts away with whispers of danger. Wolves in the shadows, storms brewing overhead. Yet this man ventured forward, undeterred. There was something different about him, something that drew my gaze and refused to let it wander. He moved slowly, reverently, his touch gentle as he ran his fingers along the rough bark of trees and the delicate fronds of ferns. There was no malice in him, only quiet wonder and a sadness that clung to him like a shadow. As I watched, I felt a stirring within me, a curiosity that was unfamiliar, an ache to understand what had brought him to this place. Remaining unseen, I followed him as he ventured deeper into the glade. He stopped at a moonlit stream, the water's surface shimmering like liquid silver. Kneeling by the edge, he withdrew a small block of wood and a knife from his satchel. With careful, deliberate movements, he began to carve. Shavings fell away, revealing the shape of a bird in mid-flight. His hands, though rough and scarred, moved with a tenderness that seemed almost otherworldly. I watched, entranced, as the figure took form beneath his blade. There was something about him that resonated with the magic of the veil, though he was not of it. His presence, instead of disrupting the balance, seemed to complement it, like a melody fitting perfectly into a song. And yet, I hesitated to approach. My kind were not meant to be seen by mortals. We were observers, not participants. But the pull toward him grew stronger with every passing moment, a thread that tugged at the very core of my being. Night fell, and the glade was bathed in the cool glow of moonlight. He remained by the stream, his finished carving resting in his palm as he gazed up at the stars. The sadness in his eyes seemed to deepen, and I felt an unfamiliar ache in my chest. I wanted to understand him, to ease the weight he carried. It was then that I made my decision. For the first time in my existence, I chose to step beyond the boundaries of what was allowed. Slowly, I let myself become visible, my form emerging from the mist like a dream taking shape. My body shimmered with silvery light, my tendrils flowing like rivers of starlight. His eyes widened as he saw me, and for a moment, I feared he might flee. But he did not. Instead, he remained still, his gaze locked on mine, a mixture of wonder and disbelief in his expression. "Are you real?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant, as though he feared the answer might shatter the moment. "As real as the wind," I replied, my voice carrying the soft cadence of rustling leaves. "And as fleeting, if you wish it." He did not wish me away. Instead, he sat where he was, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing steady but his eyes never leaving me. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable but charged, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Finally, he spoke again. "Do you have a name?" Names were meaningless among my kind, but I understood their importance to mortals. After a moment of thought, I said, "You may call me Serial." It was a name drawn from the stars above and the rhythm of his heartbeat, a name that felt right in that moment. "Serial," he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue like a melody. "I'm Calder." And so, under the moonlit canopy of the vale, our story began. Words flowed between us like the stream beside us, gentle and unhurried. He spoke of his world beyond the forest, a place of stone and iron, of struggles and loss. I listened, enraptured by the depth of his experiences, his voice weaving pictures in my mind of places I had never known. In return, I shared glimpses of the Vale's magic, showing him how to hear the whispers of the trees and feel the pulse of life beneath the earth. The night stretched on, and though dawn approached, I found myself reluctant to leave. There was something in Calder's presence that filled a void I had not realized existed within me. For the first time in my eternal existence, I felt connected, not to the Vale or the rhythm of the world, but to a single mortal soul. And I knew, deep within, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Threads of Curiosity. Days turned to weeks, and Calder became a steady presence in the Vale. Each morning, as the sun cast its golden light over the forest, I would find him wandering among the trees, his eyes drinking in the beauty around him. I learned his patterns, how he would pause by the stream to carve, or linger in the glades where the sunlight fell in dappled patches. And always, he would look for me. Though my kind shunned prolonged contact with mortals, I could not stay away. Calder's presence was a melody that resonated deep within my essence, pulling me toward him with a force I could not resist. Each time I appeared, his face would light up with a mixture of relief and wonder, as though he had been waiting for me all along. We spoke of many things in those stolen moments. Calder told me of the world beyond the Vale, a place I had never seen. His descriptions painted a picture of stark contrasts, great cities of stone and steel, where life moved swiftly and nature was a distant memory. Yet amidst the chaos, there were pockets of beauty. Fields of wildflowers, rivers that wound through quiet valleys, and skies painted with the colors of dusk. "It sounds so different from this place," I said one evening, as we sat beneath a canopy of glowing leaves. "And yet, there is a beauty in your words." "It's beautiful, yes," Calder replied, his gaze distant. "But it's also fleeting. Things change so quickly there. Nothing lasts." The sadness in his voice tugged at my heart. I reached out, letting a tendril of light brush against his hand. "The fleeting nature of your world does not diminish its worth," I said softly. "Perhaps it makes it all the more precious." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine. "Do things change here, Serial? Or is it always the same?" "The Vale is constant," I replied. "Its rhythm endures, unchanging, as it has for centuries." Calder nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "Maybe that's why I feel at peace here," he said. "Because it doesn't change. But you're different. You're not like the Vale. You feel alive." His words lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I did not know how to respond, for his perception of me was both true and deeply unsettling. I was ethereal, born of the Vale, and yet Calder's presence had awakened something within me, something that yearned and grew with each passing day. As our bond deepened, I began to sense the subtle threads of magic that wove between us. They were delicate and unspoken, yet undeniable. I showed Calder more of the Vale's secrets, teaching him how to hear the whispers of the trees and see the faint glow of life that surrounded every living thing. In return, he shared his own wisdom, stories of resilience and hope that painted a picture of the human spirit. But even as our connection grew, I could feel the Vale watching, its ancient presence pressing against me like a silent warning. My kind did not interfere with mortals. We were meant to observe, to guide from a distance. What I was doing with Calder was unprecedented, and I knew there would be consequences. Yet, in his presence, those fears seemed distant. For the first time in my existence, I was not merely a part of the Vale. I was something more, someone more, and I could not turn away from the path we had begun to walk together. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Vale. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the silent storm building between the Vale's magic and the tether growing between Calder and me. Days turned into months, and Calder's presence had become as familiar to me as the pulse of the world's rhythm, a rhythm that was slowly shifting. Each day, I noticed subtle changes in the Vale. The once harmonious hum that resonated through the trees grew discordant, as though it protested my defiance. The luminous flora dimmed in places where I lingered too long, their light flickering like dying embers. My kind, though unseen, whispered their disapproval in the wind that swept through the glades. Yet I could not let Calder go. The bond between us had grown too strong, a melody entwined with my very essence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest bathed in twilight, I found Calder sitting by the stream. The moonlight caught the edges of his face, painting him in silver. He held one of his carvings, a delicate figure of a bird in flight, and turned it over in his hands. There was a tension in his shoulders, a weight that seemed heavier than usual. "Calder," I said, my voice breaking the stillness. He looked up, his expression softening at the sight of me. "What troubles you?" He hesitated, then set the carving aside. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said. "About us." The words hung in the air, their weight settling over me. I moved closer, the faint glow of my form casting light onto his face. "What do you mean?" "You've shown me so much, Serial. This place, this magic. It feels like home now, more than anywhere else ever has. But I know it's not really mine to claim. And you're not meant to stay with someone like me, are you?" His voice was steady, but the undercurrent of sadness was unmistakable. I reached out, letting a tendril of light brush against his hand. "The veil does not claim you, Calder. You are here because your soul belongs, even if your body does not." He shook his head, his gaze falling to the stream. "But for how long? I've seen the way the forest changes around us. The way the light fades when you're near me. What if being here, being with me, is hurting you?" The question struck deep, a truth I had tried to ignore rising to the surface. I had felt the strain, the pull of the veil's magic against my growing attachment to Calder. The balance that I had once been a part of was shifting, and I could no longer deny it. "The veil. It resists what it cannot understand," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Our bond is something beyond its design. But that does not mean it is wrong." Calder looked at me, his eyes searching mine for answers I did not yet have. "And what happens if the veil decides it's had enough? What happens to you?" I could not lie to him. "I do not know," I said. "But I cannot regret what we have found, Calder, even if it comes at a cost." He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me in a way I had never known. "Then let's find a way to make it work," he said, determination replacing the doubt in his voice. "There has to be a way to keep you here, to keep us together, without losing what makes you, you." His resolve was infectious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Together, we began to search for answers, delving into the secrets of the veil. I showed Calder ancient runes carved into the stones, their meanings lost even to my kind. He helped me uncover hidden places where the veil's magic converged, places where the boundary between realms was thinnest. But the deeper we delved, the more the veil seemed to resist. The glades grew quieter, the air heavier, as though the forest itself was watching us. My kind did not appear, but their presence lingered on the edges of my awareness, a silent chorus of disapproval. One night, as we stood in a clearing bathed in the light of a full moon, Calder turned to me with a newfound determination in his eyes. "What if there's a way to anchor you here," he said, "to tie your essence to this world so the veil can't pull you away?" The idea was dangerous, the implications vast. To tether myself to Calder's world would mean altering the very fabric of my being, leaving behind the freedom of the ether for something more permanent. It was a path no ethereal had ever taken, and the risks were unknown. But as I looked into Calder's eyes, I knew I could not turn away from the chance to remain by his side. "It may be possible," I said slowly, "but it would require a ritual, one that blends our essences, creating a bond that the veil cannot sever." Calder nodded, his resolve unwavering. "Then we'll do it. Whatever it takes, Serial. I'm not losing you." As the moonlight bathed us in its silver glow, I felt the weight of our decisions settle over me. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice. But with Calder's hand in mine, I knew we would face it together. For better or worse, our fates were now entwined, and there was no turning back. Chapter 4. Ethereal Consequences. The days that followed Calder's decision were a blur of anticipation and unspoken tension. The veil, once a sanctuary, now felt heavy with its disapproval. The air hummed with an unnatural stillness, and the songs of the trees were muted, as if the forest itself held its breath. My kind, though unseen, lingered at the edges of my awareness, silent observers of a transgression they would not intervene to stop but would never condone. I had told Calder of the ritual, its risks and the price it demanded. The bond we sought to create was not a thing of mortal or ethereal design. It was something new, a bridge between realms that could only be forged under the light of a blood moon. The magic required would draw upon my essence and Calder's will, intertwining our souls in a way that defied natural order. As the fated night approached, Calder grew quieter, his usual warmth tempered by introspection. We spent our evenings by the moonlit stream, the silence between us filled with unspoken fears and unyielding resolve. I could sense the weight of his thoughts, the lingering doubt that hovered at the edge of his mind. Yet, when he looked at me, his gaze was steady, his determination unwavering. "Cyril," he said one night, his voice breaking the stillness. "Are you certain this is what you want? That this is worth the risk?" His question pierced me, not because I doubted my choice, but because I understood the depth of his concern. I reached for his hand, my tendrils of light entwining gently with his fingers. "I have lived centuries within the veil, Calder," I replied softly. "But in the brief time I have known you, I have felt more alive than I ever imagined possible. This is not a choice I make lightly. It is the only choice my heart will allow." He held my gaze for a long moment before nodding, the lines of worry softening as he squeezed my hand. "Then we'll face it together." The blood moon rose high above the veil, casting the forest in an eerie crimson glow. The glade where the ritual would take place seemed to pulse with latent energy, the air thick with a tension that made the hairs on Calder's arms stand on end. I guided him to the center of the clearing, where a circle of glowing runes had been etched into the earth. The symbols pulsed faintly, their light synchronized with the rhythm of my own essence. "Lie down," I instructed, my voice calm despite the storm raging within me. Calder obeyed without hesitation, his trust in me a steady anchor amidst the chaos. I knelt beside him, placing my hands lightly on his chest as I began to weave the spell. The ritual was unlike anything I had ever attempted. The veil's magic resisted me at every turn, as though the forest itself sought to tear the spell apart. My tendrils of light intertwined with Calder's body, drawing forth the essence that made him who he was. It was not pain he felt but an overwhelming vulnerability, a baring of his very soul. And in return, I offered him mine, the starlit threads of my being merging with the fabric of his humanity. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The world fell silent, the pulse of the veil fading into nothingness. Then, with a sound like 1,000 harp strings snapping at once, the spell reached its apex. A burst of light enveloped us, blinding and all-encompassing. When it faded, I collapsed beside Calder, my form flickering like a dying flame. Calder stirred first, his breathing labored but steady. His hand found mine, squeezing weakly. "Cyril," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Are you?" I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze. "I am here," I whispered. But even as I spoke, I felt the difference in myself. My body, once composed of pure light, now carried a weight I had never known. I was no longer fully ethereal, nor entirely mortal. I was something in between, a being balanced precariously on the edge of two worlds. Chapter 5. The Edge of Forever. The veil rejected me. Its rhythms, once a constant hum in my existence, fell silent. The glades that had been my sanctuary now seemed foreign, their beauty distant and cold. My kind, though unseen, withdrew entirely, their judgment a palpable void that followed me wherever I went. I was no longer one of them. Calder and I left the veil, our footsteps carrying us into the mortal world he had once called home. The transition was jarring. The cities of stone and iron he had described were even harsher than I had imagined, their noise and chaos a stark contrast to the serene harmony of the forest. Yet, within the cracks of this world, I found moments of beauty. A child's laughter, the first light of dawn breaking over a sleeping town, the warmth of Calder's hand in mine. Our bond was strong, forged in magic and tempered by our shared sacrifices. But it was not without its challenges. Calder's mortality was a constant reminder of the impermanence of our union. Though I had taken on a form closer to his, I did not age as he did. Time was cruel in its unyielding march, carving lines into his face even as I remained unchanged. "Do you regret it?" He asked me one evening as we sat by a crackling fire. Leaving the veil, becoming this. I shook my head, my hand reaching to touch his cheek. Regret has no place in my heart, Calder. Every moment with you is a gift, more precious than anything I left behind. He smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. And when I'm gone, what then, Serial? I could not answer, for the truth was one I dared not face. The thought of a world without Calder was an ache I could not bear. But that night, as I watched him sleep, I made a silent vow. If our time together was finite, I would ensure that every second was filled with meaning. Years passed, and the world changed around us. Calder's strength waned, his steps growing slower, his voice quieter. Yet, his spirit remained unbroken, his love for me unwavering. On the final night of his life, he took my hand and whispered, "Thank you, Serial, for everything." Tears fell freely as I held him, my light dimming as his life slipped away. When the dawn came, I buried him beneath a tree that overlooked a meadow filled with wildflowers. The veil's presence lingered faintly there, a reminder of the place where our story began. I stood at the edge of the meadow, my heart heavy with grief. But as the sun rose, its light bathing the world in gold, I felt a faint pulse within me. The echo of our bond, a piece of Calder that would remain with me forever. Though he was gone, his love had changed me, grounding me in a way that even the veil's magic could not. With renewed purpose, I turned toward the horizon. There were still secrets to uncover, wonders to behold, and lives to touch. Calder had taught me the beauty of impermanence, the strength found in fleeting moments. And though my path was now one of solitude, I carried his memory as a beacon, a reminder that even the briefest connection could leave an eternal mark.